Hermione Granger was furious. The one boy she had a smidgen of interest in turned into a bigger idiot than usually. All because of her. Helen Bloody Crowley. She made every girl in the school look bad, and she knew it. In fact, she enjoyed the seething looks. And those outfits. The boys were bad enough, but she turned them into drooling apes concerned with one thing and one thing only. For the first time in her life, Hermione Granger was in complete agreement with nearly every girl in the school. Helen Crowley was their worst enemy. They must destroy her or render her useless. For the first time in a long time, Luna Lovegood was one happy girl. She was the only straight girl in the school who didn't despise Crowley with every fiber in her being. This was because A. Helen not only knew of the creatures she was always talking about, but had seen them firsthand. B. She was the only one Helen didn't act like a complete bitch around, and C. Because out of the entire student body and staff, only Luna and Hagrid actually got along well enough with the Hellhound bodyguards to the point they could pet one. This was because they were the only people who didn't show fear towards the hounds. Animals picked up on that sort of thing, hellhounds in particular. As such, she was officially labeled Helen's lackey to the point her things were no longer being taken and the other girls left her alone. It was less of them being afraid of bullying her and more along the lines of them being more focused on destroying Helen. The champion for Hogwarts is Helen Crowley? Said Dumbledore, not sure he had read that correctly. How in magic's name did she bypass his age line? And why had the goblet picked her? Helen smirked, and sauntered to the side room. Dumbledore was about to follow when the goblet spit out one last name. Harry Potter. Helen was in the side room, looking very smug indeed, when it walked in. She sat up and glared at it. Fleur, who was far more versed in absolute bitch than the rest of the room, noticed the immediate change. "This is unprecedented. May I introduce the fourth champion?" said Bagman a little too excitedly. Helen eyed the thing with open distaste. Now that she had a proper look at Potter, she could easily tell the thing was a fake. Probably Dumbledore's attempts to keep the fact he lost the real one under wraps. She more or less ignored the fake, though she made a point to keep her distance from the thing. Frankly, she was amazed the goblins hadn't picked up on it yet. Creating one of those came very, very close to committing line theft, which they absolutely hated. Actually, she was more surprised her father had failed to mention Dumbledore had created a fake. Or that for some reason it was a boy. About the only inspection she gave of it was to see how people missed the fact it wasn't real. Whoever created it at least had the sense to change the eye color, but the green was entirely the wrong shade. And that lightning bolt was the wrong shape. Helen was openly disgusted being that close to such poor craftsmanship. It was like some low-level pit demon who was recently converted decided to make his own meat suit, had failed in creating it properly, and the thing was so defective it couldn't be used like it was supposed to. She was half tempted to cut the strings ... until she had a much more amusing idea. She wasn't a bitch for nothing, and at the very least this was a good way to send the message to the Magicals. You don't try to take something from a crossroads demon's daughter. Especially if that demon was Fergus Crowley. The only reason the goblins hadn't raised a fuss by now was because Dumbledore didn't want them to know he had made a fake using James Potter's remains. They never would have remained quiet about the potential for line theft. Helen couldn't wait to see Dumbledore's face when he realized his fake Potter was possessed by a demon with a mark to keep him from exorcising it. If there was one thing Meg was good for, it was demon runes and spells. Even if she thought Azazel and her brother were total dicks. For some reason she got along with Meg just fine. In Gryffindor Tower a week later, Harry sat up with a gasp as something entered through the window and into his body. The black smoke rammed itself down the throat and the slime green eyes turned to a pitch black. Crowley had been very amused by Helen's idea of turning the fake into a meat suit for one of the lackeys who knew better than to piss her off. One so low ranked that he would follow orders without questioning her, because otherwise she would turn him into ash. However, the amusement value of a demon-possessed fake working in the shadows with Helen was so high that it was worth whittling down the wards around the school and ensuring the house elves would leave that window open just enough for the smoke to come in. No one would realize that the fake was now a demon, especially since Harry rarely ate to begin with. The wards of Hogwarts were so outdated and depleted that they were a joke. Breaking one was pathetically easy. Helen was with Hagrid, cooing at the massive three-headed dog. "He's absolutely adorable," she said enthusiastically. Hagrid beamed at her. The minute she found out he wasn't the least bit afraid of her dogs and had even petted Lucy a little, Helen had liked him. She toned down her queen bitch persona around him, and the two were often found debating dangerous and oftentimes terrifying animals. Helen had been unimpressed with the Acromantula, but the second she saw Fluffy for the first time she had actually squealed in girlish delight and started petting any head she could reach. That was actually what cemented her as a nice girl in Hagrid's book. Sure, she was a bit frosty, but it was hard for the half-giant to equate the girl as evil when she was so friendly and gentle with Fluffy. Beside her, Luna was petting the lone head Helen couldn't reach. It was because of this that Hagrid discreetly showed Helen the dragons. While she appreciated the heads-up, she really didn't care about the fire-breathing lizards. For magic's sake, she was the rider. She specialized in fire spells and she could spit fireballs for fun. Being hit with dragon fire wasn't going to bother her one bit. She was fireproof as a consequence of being a pyromaniac and she laughed off burns. Alistair had taken great enjoyment teaching her that fireball trick, and she had even greater fun practicing it on the idiots on the rack. It said a lot about her personality that he would agree to her claim of being his niece. She amused him that much, and seeing her attempts at torture gave the demon some strange measure of pride. The girl had a strong, too pure soul, but she could match him scream to agonized scream. It was a strange thing that such a girl could match Alistair in the torture department, Crowley in the snark and generally conniving area, and yet still remain as cheerful and openly innocent as the day Crowley rescued her from suburbia hell. A hell which, Crowley was very pleased to note, would not remain in existence much longer. He was going to send the hellhounds to Surrey the second Petunia Dursley's contract came up, and while watching the residents struggle to get out of it would be amusing. Having Helen go in and torch the place with a song in her heart and laughter in her voice was far more rewarding. Besides, their contract stated that they only got 10 years. He never said a word about Helen returning to finish the place off a little early. Helen picked out the most vicious, nasty, and all-around dangerous one of the bunch. The demon-possessed fake picked the tamest. Fortunately the weak idiot knew enough to cover his tracks, and wizards weren't the smartest bunch in the world. They wouldn't look twice at the spells he was about to cast to get that egg, especially when he had Granger give him an alibi for how he knew them by asking her to translate. The brunette was played like a fiddle. Helen ignored the crowd outside, and listened to Evanescence on her headphones. Finally it was her turn, and she tossed the idiotic gym outfit they had conjured up for her. Snapping into place was her standard rider outfit, minus the coat. She had long since created a spell that would conjure up the outfit she had worn walking into the school the second she started channeling hell magic. It made things so much simpler and it was always entertaining to see the teachers try and fail to get her to change her clothes to something a bit more decent in their terms. Helen sauntered out of the tent, enjoying the looks of the adult females and a good chunk of the female students. The adults in the crowd looked scandalized by her outfit, and the younger ones looked pissed. Most of the men were staring at either her bust or what little they could see of her ass. Idiots. Helen, however, was smirking at the horntail. The hormonal mother dragon took one whiff of the girl's scent and knew she was trouble. It shot flames at the Hell Witch, who didn't bother to dodge or draw up her fake wand. The only one she owned was a spare one her father had lying around, since most of the time she never needed one. She just brought it to keep the Europeans morons off her case. Helen cackled in an insane manner. She had plenty of time to perfect her bitch cackle, as she liked to call it. She ran up the rocks, ignoring the disappointed sounds of the males in the crowd when they realized she wore bike shorts under that flared skirt of hers, hiding her bottom half. She literally treated the sharp rocks as flat ground, climbing them with distracting ease. The horntail tried to burn her alive, but the fire barely singed her hair. 2 more tries, and it realized its fire wouldn't harm the nuisance. It tried to slam its poisonous spiked tail instead. Helen vaulted over the spikes, cackling, as she did a textbook duck and roll close to the nest. She grabbed the golden egg, and in a fit of mischief stole one of the few remaining living eggs in the nest. Her body blocked the eggs from view, so she made it appear as though she only took the gold one. Hagrid wasn't the only soul who wanted a pet dragon. However, unlike him, Helen knew how to train danger, fire-breathing and occasionally poisonous animals. And she wasn't stupid enough to raise one in a wooden hut. Helen smirked when she got an almost full point from each judge. The only one who gave her a 7 was Maxime, who clearly disapproved of her outfit. Karkaroff looked very much like he would gladly give her those missing points as extra for the show she just gave. It was so easy to manipulate men. Show a little flesh, smile the right way and use the right tone. At this point she had a bigger list of males in her life that she actually respected than she did those she didn't. And it took a lot to get on that list. Madame Pomfrey thinned her mouth at Helen's outfit, but the girl snorted. Hey, they're the idiots who came up with dragons. And this outfit happens to be fireproof against stronger flames and comes with shielding to boot. Not my problem if it's so skimpy, she said flatly. Pomfrey sent a few spells, detected those spells on the girl keeping flames of any kind away, unless it was healing fire, which was so rare it wasn't worth mentioning, and a general energy on her core that shouldn't be there normally. Sadly, when Helen showed up so Pomfrey would at least have a baseline for her usual health, something she always did with a new doctor, healer. She had explained that in order to minimize the damage the rider did to her body and maximize the amount of control she had, the demon who turned her into a rider had bypassed possession and gone straight for her magical core. The addition Pomfrey detected with her spell was the rider's power covering her magical core. Such additions were dangerous, almost impossible to do correctly, and more importantly highly illegal with certain magics. One of the few exceptions was the rider's power, but if you were that desperate then the ministry thought you deserved the headache of having to be a demon's bitch. They usually fined the idiot if that was the addition and ignored the person who made it. Because Helen was American, or at least had been raised in America, they couldn't do that much. Luna bounced into the tent. You got the highest score. The others didn't do nearly as well, she informed her best friend. Helen was nicer to her than Ginny had ever been. Pansy Parkinson was not a smart girl. She wasn't beautiful, she wasn't as rich as she would like, and her charm needed work. The only thing she had going for her was that she was a self-serving, conniving bitch. Though apparently not at the level that Skank Crowley was, to her age. Crowley had waltzed in, and in a single day had taken over the top bitch position in the school. And that was simply not excusable, since the entire reason why Pansy was more or less left alone was because she was too much for most girls or boys to handle. Her position in the school, and more importantly in her house, relied on her ability to remain on top. Which meant the newcomer had to be taken down a peg or 10. And Pansy had the perfect way to do that. She would use Crowley's own method of power against her and at the same time make her head of house pleased that he wouldn't have to deal with the boys ruining their potions because they were staring at Crowley again. So, shortly after the first task and close after the news of the Yule Ball, Pansy managed to maneuver Crowley into an unused corridor where several of the upper-year male Slytherins were waiting. It was about time to teach Helen Crowley a lesson. Helen took one look inside the room where the boys were waiting, all sporting suspicious tents in their pants and locking the door behind them. There was no escape, not for a normal witch. Pansy looked particularly pleased with herself, so there was no doubt who had orchestrated this mess. Helen sneered at them all. "I'm going to ask you idiots the same thing I asked the fool who tried to get me to enter his home when I was 11 without any other adults nearby. 1, 2 or 3? 1, 2 or 3 what?" sneered Bull, whose father was once a well-respected Death Eater. "Why, the degree of burns I'm about to give you, of course. Of course I could always leave it to surprise, but to be honest, the last time I did that the man didn't exactly make it to the healer," she chirped. "Nice try, bitch, but everyone knows the rider can't come out during the day," said Pansy. "Who said I needed that to kick your ass?" asked Helen, cocking her head. "Uncle Alistair showed me how to cause maximum pain and minimum damage when he was training me in the pit." And with that, Helen charged. By the time the teachers followed the screaming, it was already too late. Helen was just finishing with the last one and Pansy was screaming from horror at what the other girl had done. Snape had to break down the door with his own spells just to get in. "What in blazes is going on here?" he demanded. Dumbledore, McGonagall and Moody were right behind him. Because Pansy was still screaming, Helen answered him. "Parkinson here apparently doesn't like the fact I took over as the top bitch here in school, so she decided to teach me a lesson with her friends here. Unfortunately for her, I know more on how to beat people up without the rider's powers than she realized." Helen spat in Pansy's direction. Snape gave Pansy a look. If one were pressed, Helen would say he was a mixture of disgusted and disappointed. "Would you be willing to submit to Veritaserum or Pensieve to prove your claim?" he asked. Helen sneered at Pansy, before she looked at Snape. "Of course, Professor." Pansy was in for a lot of unpleasant questions when Helen proved to be telling the truth. Dumbledore looked disappointed, but Snape was disgusted. The foolish girl should have known better than to challenge a rider, especially when she didn't see or check for hellhounds. If they didn't get involved, then she should have realized Helen was far more dangerous than she had originally assumed.